The storm struck the English moors with the fury of heaven's wrath, each crack of thunder reverberating through Clara Whitcomb's bones as she clutched her sister's trembling hand. Rain lashed against her face like icy needles, soaking through the threadbare wool of her cloak until it clung to her shoulders like a shroud. Their few remaining possessions, a battered trunk, 2 grain sacks, and her mother's china teapot, lay scattered in the mud beside the stone cottage that had been their home for 23 years. "Clara, I'm frightened," whispered Ellie, her 12-year-old voice barely audible above the howling wind. Her golden hair, so like their mother's, hung in sodden tendrils around her pale face. Clara pulled her sister closer, feeling the sharp edges of her own ribs through her stays. They had eaten nothing but thin gruel for 3 days, and now even that meager comfort was lost. "We shall manage, dearest. We always do." The words tasted bitter as ash on her tongue, but she could not let Ellie see her despair. Behind them, the cottage door hung ajar, creaking on its hinges like a death rattle. Inside, the hearth lay cold and empty. Outside, Magistrate Barlow's men had finished their grim work, turning 2 lives into debris with the efficiency of gravediggers. All for unpaid rent that her father had disputed before his death, rent increased 3-fold without notice or cause. Clara lifted her chin against the storm, her dark eyes blazing with fierce determination. "I swear to you, Ellie, by our mother's memory, I will not let them crush us. There must be justice somewhere in this world, and I shall find it." Thunder rolled across the heavens like God's own laughter, mocking her declaration. But as lightning split the purple sky, the rumble of carriage wheels cut through the storm's chaos. Clara turned, her heart hammering, to see an elegant black coach approaching through the deluge. The vehicle bore a silver crest, 3 ravens circling a sword that made her breath catch. Every soul in Derbyshire knew that the Marquess of Ashbourne, Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, master of 20,000 acres and sovereign of countless lives. The carriage halted mere yards from where they stood. Through rain-streaked glass, she glimpsed a figure in the shadows, broad shoulders outlined in expensive wool, and something that glinted pale against the darkness. A face watching her. Their eyes met across the storm-racked distance, and Clara felt the world tilt on its axis. She stood straighter, dignity wrapping around her like armor, even as her clothes dripped mud, and her stomach cramped with hunger. She would not cower before any man, peer or pauper. The coach door opened. Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, Marquess of Ashbourne, had learned long ago to observe the world from behind walls of ice and privilege. At 30, he possessed everything society deemed valuable: wealth, title, influence. Yet as he watched the young woman in the storm, something stirred in his chest that he had thought long dead. She stood with the regal bearing of a queen. Despite her obvious destitution, rain streaming down her face like tears she refused to shed. Her dark hair had escaped its pins, framing features that spoke of intelligence and strength rather than mere beauty. But it was her eyes that held him captive, brown as autumn earth, blazing with a pride that poverty could not diminish. "My lord?" His coachman's voice penetrated his reverie. "Shall we continue?" Nathaniel's hand moved instinctively to the scar at his left temple, a pale ridge that marked more than flesh. 7 years had passed since Lydia's death, since consumption had stolen the only woman he had ever loved, leaving him hollow as a burned-out church. He had built his life around duty and distance, never allowing emotion to breach his carefully constructed defenses. Yet something in this stranger's defiant stance called to him across the chasm of class and circumstance. "Wait," he murmured, his breath fogging the glass. Clara Whitcomb had been born into a world that offered women few choices and fewer mercies. The eldest daughter of Thomas Whitcomb, a tenant farmer whose honesty had ultimately destroyed him. She had learned early that survival required both steel and sacrifice. When their parents succumbed to fever 3 winters past, Clara had become mother, father, and protector to young Ellie. She possessed an education unusual for her station, taught by her mother, who had once served as governess to a merchant's family. Clara could read Latin and French, pass mathematics, and discuss philosophy with any learned man, but knowledge without opportunity was merely another form of prison. The land seizure had been swift and merciless. Magistrate Barlow, acting on behalf of absent landlords, had declared their rent in arrears. Clara's protests that her father had disputed the increased rates fell on deaf ears. 3 generations of Whitcomb labour meant nothing against legal documents and aristocratic greed. Now they stood homeless in a storm, with winter approaching and no refuge in sight. Clara had considered the workhouse, had even walked to its gates, but the thought of subjecting Ellie to that hell had turned her back. She would die first. Clara. Ellie's voice drew her from bitter memories. The gentleman is alighting. Indeed, the carriage door had opened fully, and a figure emerged into the storm. Lord Ashbourne moved with fluid grace despite the wind, his many-caped greatcoat billowing around him like dark wings. He was taller than she had expected, with the lean build of a man who knew physical labor despite his noble birth. His face, partially shadowed beneath his hat brim, bore aristocratic angles, softened by something that might have been compassion. As he approached, Clara noticed the thin white scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone, a mark that somehow made him appear more human rather than less. His eyes, she realized with a start, were grey as winter sky, and fixed upon her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Madam," he said, his voice cultured but not cold, "I am Nathaniel Hawthorne. I could not pass without offering assistance." The rain had plastered his dark hair to his skull, and water dripped from his jaw. That he had left the comfort of his carriage to stand in the storm spoke of character, but Clara had learned to distrust aristocratic charity. "We require no assistance, my lord," she replied, her voice steady despite the chattering of her teeth. "We are perfectly capable of managing our affairs." His grey eyes flickered with what might have been admiration. "I see that you are. However, the storm shows no sign of abating, and I could not live with myself if I allowed a lady and child to suffer exposure when help is so readily offered." "I am no lady," Clara said sharply. "I am a farmer's daughter, and we accept charity from no one." "Then perhaps," Nathaniel said quietly, "you would consider employment." Clara's breath caught in her throat. Employment. The word hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Beside her, Ellie pressed closer, hope flickering in her wide blue eyes, despite Clara's warnings against trusting the nobility. "What manner of employment?" Clara asked, her voice carefully neutral. She would not betray desperation, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Nathaniel studied her face, noting the proud tilt of her chin even as rain traced silver paths down her cheeks. "My elderly aunt, Lady Margaret, requires a companion, someone educated, well-spoken, capable of providing intelligent conversation and assistance with correspondence. Additionally, I have need of a governess for," he paused, his gaze shifting to Ellie, "for any young ladies who might reside at the manor." The implication was clear. Ellie could receive an education, while Clara earned their keep. It was more than she had dared hope for, yet Clara's pride rebelled against accepting what felt dangerously close to charity masked as employment. "And the terms of such a position?" she inquired, lifting her chin another degree. £50 per annum, plus board and lodging for both yourself and the child," suitable clothing provided as befits your station within the household. Your sister would receive full education in languages, mathematics, music and deportment. £50. Clara had never seen so much money at once in her entire life. It was generous, suspiciously so. Her eyes narrowed as she searched his face for hidden motives. Why? The single word carried the weight of her suspicion and her desperate need to understand. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, rain drumming against his greatcoat. Because, he said finally, intelligence should not be wasted, and dignity deserves recognition regardless of birth. Something in his tone, a note of personal understanding, made Clara's defensive walls waver. She saw past the aristocratic facade to glimpse a man who perhaps understood what it meant to feel trapped by circumstances beyond one's control. "I am not some charity case to be pitied," she said fiercely. If it would be because I earn every penny through honest work, I will not be your pet project or your entertainment." The last word carried implications they both understood. Too many noble households used employment as a polite term for exploitation of vulnerable women. "You have my word as a gentleman," Nathaniel said solemnly, "that you would be treated with complete respect and propriety. Lady Margaret is an exacting mistress, but fair, and she values competence above all else." Lightning illuminated the moors in stark white, followed immediately by thunder that seemed to shake the very earth. Ellie whimpered and pressed against Clara's side, her small body shaking with cold and fear. The decision was made in that moment. Clara could endure anything, pride swallowed, dignity bent, if it meant safety and opportunity for Ellie. Her sister deserved better than a life of grinding poverty and constant fear. "Very well," Clara said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was accepting. "I will come to Ashbourne Manor. But understand this, Lord Hawthorne, I work for wages honestly earned. Nothing more, nothing less." "Understood completely," he replied, and something in his eyes suggested he respected her conditions more than he might have respected easier acceptance. "Then we have an arrangement." Clara extended her hand, bare of gloves, rain-slicked but firm. Nathaniel removed his own glove and clasped her fingers briefly. The touch sent unexpected warmth racing up Clara's arm, a shock of connection that had nothing to do with the storm's electricity. His hand was strong, calloused despite his noble birth, and warm against her chilled skin. "The carriage will take you to the manor immediately," he said, releasing her hand with what seemed like reluctance. "Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, will see to your comfort and explain your duties." As they gathered their scattered possessions and climbed into the luxurious interior of the coach, Clara caught Nathaniel's eye one final time through the window. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that this arrangement might prove more complicated than either had anticipated. The carriage wheels began to turn, carrying them toward Ashbourne Manor and an uncertain future. But for the first time in months, Clara felt something besides despair stirring in her chest. It might have been hope, or it might have been something far more dangerous. Ashbourne Manor rose from the moors like something from a fairy tale, its honey-coloured stone walls and diamond-paned windows gleaming through the storm. Clara pressed her face to the carriage window, drinking in the sight of terraced gardens, ornate fountains, and wings that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. "It's like a palace," Ellie whispered, her eyes round with wonder. Clara squeezed her sister's hand, but said nothing. Palaces, she knew, could be prisons as easily as sanctuaries. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a woman of middle years, with steel-grey hair and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. She received them in the servants' hall with brisk efficiency, her tone respectful but reserved. "His lordship has explained your circumstances," she said, leading them through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. You'll have rooms in the family wing, as befits your position with Lady Margaret. Breakfast is at 7, luncheon at 1, dinner at 8. Lady Margaret takes her morning chocolate at 9 precisely. She'll expect you then. Their quarters proved surprisingly comfortable. 2 connecting chambers with real beds, a fireplace and windows overlooking the formal gardens. After months of one-room cottage living, the luxury felt almost sinful. "Will we truly live here?" Ellie asked, running her fingers over the embroidered counterpane. "For now," Clara replied, though uncertainty gnawed at her. Such good fortune felt too fragile to trust. Lady Margaret Hawthorne was a formidable woman of 70-odd years, with silver hair styled in elaborate curls and eyes sharp as cut crystal. She received Clara in the morning room, surrounded by newspapers, correspondence and a small mountain of books. "So," she said without preamble, "you're the farmer's daughter my nephew has installed as my companion. Can you read?" "Yes, my lady, Latin, French and English. I have some acquaintance with Italian and can manage basic German." Lady Margaret's eyebrows rose fractionally. "Mathematics?" "Through advanced algebra, some geometry and natural philosophy." "Music?" "I play pianoforte adequately and sing tolerably well." The elderly woman studied Clara with the intensity of a general assessing troops. "And what think you of Burke's latest pamphlet on the revolution in France?" For the next hour, Clara found herself engaged in the most stimulating intellectual discussion of her life. Lady Margaret proved to be remarkably well informed about politics, philosophy and literature, with opinions that would have scandalized proper society. By the conversation's end, Clara had nearly forgotten her precarious position. "You'll do," Lady Margaret announced finally. "Most companions are simpering misses with cotton wool for brains. You at least can hold a proper conversation." It was in the library that Clara first encountered Nathaniel again, 3 days after her arrival. She was reading to Ellie from a volume of Shakespeare when his voice interrupted from the doorway. "I trust you're settling in comfortably?" Clara looked up from Much Ado About Nothing to find him watching them with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. In daylight without the storm's drama, he appeared younger, perhaps only a few years older than her own 23. His dark hair was neatly arranged, his clothing impeccable, but something in his grey eyes suggested the same restless energy she had sensed during their first meeting. "Very comfortably, thank you, my lord," she replied, conscious of Ellie's curious gaze moving between them. "Please, continue," he said, settling into a chair near the fire. "I've always been fond of that particular play." Clara hesitated, then resumed reading Beatrice's sharp retorts to Benedict's wordplay. As the scenes unfolded, she became aware of Nathaniel's attention, not merely polite interest, but genuine engagement with both the text and her interpretation of it. "You read beautifully," he commented when she paused. "Have you considered that Beatrice's wit might serve as armor rather than mere cleverness?" The observation was astute, touching on themes Clara had pondered herself. "Perhaps," she replied carefully, "she has learned that humor provides better protection than tears." Their eyes met across the leather-bound volume, and Clara felt that strange spark of connection again, a meeting of minds that transcended social boundaries. "Indeed," Nathaniel murmured, "sometimes laughter is the only defense against a world that offers few choices to intelligent women." The comment was too perceptive, too understanding, for casual conversation. Clara sensed layers beneath his words, personal experience, perhaps, or observation of others' struggles. These encounters became routine over the following weeks. Nathaniel would appear in the library during Ellie's lessons, contributing insights that revealed both broad education and deep thoughtfulness. He spoke of his travels on the continent, his service with Wellington's forces in Spain, his observations of social reform movements spreading across England. Clara found herself looking forward to these discussions with an eagerness that alarmed her. She told herself it was merely intellectual stimulation, a farmer's daughter hungry for ideas beyond her station. But when Nathaniel smiled at her clever responses, when his eyes lit with appreciation for her wit, her pulse quickened in ways that had nothing to do with academic interest. One evening, returning late from Lady Margaret's chambers, where they had been cataloguing correspondence, Clara encountered Nathaniel in the corridor outside her room. He stood before a tall window, still fully dressed despite the late hour, staring out at the moonlit moors. "Lord Hawthorne," she inquired softly, "is all well?" He turned, and in the candlelight she saw exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "Forgive me, Miss Whitcomb, I didn't mean to disturb you." "You appear troubled," she observed, stepping closer despite her better judgment. For a moment, he seemed inclined to dismiss her concern with polite deflection. Then his careful composure cracked slightly. "Some nights sleep proves elusive." Clara understood nightmares. She had suffered them herself after their parents' death, dreams of fever and helplessness that left her gasping in the darkness. Something in his expression, vulnerability quickly masked, told her he fought similar demons. "The war?" she asked gently. His hand moved instinctively to the scar at his temple. "Among other things, the mind has curious ways of preserving what we would rather forget." They stood in comfortable silence, moonlight streaming through the window to cast silver patterns on the floor between them. Clara found herself studying his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way shadow pooled in the hollow beneath his cheekbone. "Perhaps," she said impulsively, "difficult memories serve a purpose. They remind us that we've survived worse things than tonight's troubles." Nathaniel turned to look at her fully, something shifting in his expression. Spoken like someone who has tested that philosophy personally. "Loss teaches resilience," Clara replied simply, "though I confess I prefer it as a teacher to poverty or powerlessness." "Yes," he said quietly, "I imagine you do." The air between them had grown charged with unspoken understanding. Clara became suddenly aware of her state of undress. She wore only a simple woolen robe over her night shift, her hair loose around her shoulders. Propriety demanded she excuse herself immediately. Instead, she found herself asking, "What keeps you wakeful tonight, my lord?" "Duty," he said after a pause. "Responsibility, the weight of choices that affect others' lives, such as offering employment to homeless farmers' daughters." A smile ghosted across his features. "That particular choice troubles my sleep." "Not at all, though it has complicated my days considerably." The admission hung between them like a confession. Clara's breath caught as she recognized the implication that her presence affected him as deeply as his affected her. "Lord Hawthorne." "Nathaniel," he corrected softly. "When we're alone like this, away from watchful eyes and social expectations, might we not dispense with titles?" The request was dangerously intimate, a step across invisible boundaries that protected them both. Clara knew she should refuse, should retreat to the safety of formal distance. "Nathaniel," she whispered instead, tasting his name like forbidden wine. His eyes darkened at the sound, and for one breathless moment Clara thought he might reach for her. The tension stretched between them, taut as a violin string, until the distant chiming of the hall clock broke the spell. "I should retire," Clara said, though she made no move toward her door. "Yes," he agreed, not stepping back. "As should I." Neither moved. The moment extended, precious and precarious, until footsteps echoed from the main staircase, a servant making final rounds. The spell shattered. Clara gathered her robe closer and took a step toward her chambers, but Nathaniel's voice stopped her. Clara, her given name on his lips, sent warmth spiraling through her chest. Thank you for listening, for understanding. She met his eyes one final time, seeing gratitude and something deeper, something that made her heart race with equal measures of hope and terror. "Good night, Nathaniel," she replied, and slipped into her room before her courage could fail her entirely. But sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of grey eyes and gentle voices, of hands almost touching across moonlit corridors. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by a mud-splattered courier who demanded personal receipt from Lord Ashbourne. Clara, descending the main staircase after Lady Margaret's morning toilet, witnessed Nathaniel's face drain of colour as he read the contents. "My lord?" She moved toward him instinctively, alarmed by his stricken expression. He looked up as though seeing her from a great distance, the paper trembling in his hands. Forgive me. I must attend to urgent business." Before she could respond, he strode past her toward his study, the letter crushed in his fist. Clara stared after him, unease prickling along her spine like ice water. That evening, Lady Margaret summoned her with unusual urgency. Clara found the elderly woman pacing before the fire, her normally perfect composure fractured. "Sit down, child," Lady Margaret commanded, her voice tight with worry. "We must discuss a matter of utmost delicacy." Clara perched on the edge of a chair, hands folded, waiting. "There are rumours," Lady Margaret began carefully, "concerning my nephew's legitimacy. Whispers that his father was not the 7th Marquess, but rather a liaison of my sister-in-law's before her marriage." The words hit Clara like physical blows. Illegitimacy would strip Nathaniel of his title, his lands, his entire identity. In England's rigid social hierarchy, bastards, even noble ones, possessed no legal standing. "Surely such claims are mere gossip," Clara said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Perhaps. But gossip, in the wrong hands, becomes weaponry." Lady Margaret's eyes glittered with fierce intelligence. "Sir Reginald Barlow has been making inquiries. The same man who orchestrated your family's dispossession now seeks to destroy my nephew." Clara's blood ran cold. Barlow, the magistrate whose greed had left her and Ellie homeless. What proof could he possibly claim to possess? Letters, supposedly, documents that allegedly prove the timeline of conception, places Nathaniel's birth before my brother's marriage. Lady Margaret's hands clenched into fists. Whether authentic or forged matters little if society chooses to believe them. The implications crashed over Clara in waves. If Nathaniel lost his title, their arrangement would crumble. She and Ellie would be cast out again, but that personal concern paled beside her anguish for him. She had witnessed his dedication to his tenants, his genuine care for those under his protection. The injustice of seeing such a man destroyed by lies and legal technicalities made her soul burn with rage. "There's more," Lady Margaret continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The letters allegedly contain another revelation, one that would make any personal attachment between you and Nathaniel impossible." "I don't understand." "The documents claim that Nathaniel's true father was one Thomas Whitcomb. Your father, child." The world tilted sideways. Clara gripped the chair arms as nausea rose in her throat. "No, that's impossible. My father was an honest man, faithful to my mother until his death. I believe you. But if these claims gain credence," Lady Margaret didn't need to finish. "If society believed Clara and Nathaniel shared a father, any relationship between them would be deemed incestuous, a scandal that would destroy both their lives." Clara stumbled to her feet, her mind reeling. "Where is Nathaniel? Does he know?" The letter contained these allegations. He has locked himself in his study and refuses to see anyone. Without waiting for permission, Clara fled the room. She found Nathaniel's study door barred, but pressed her ear to the wood and heard the unmistakable sound of weeping, harsh, masculine sobs that tore at her heart. "Nathaniel," she called softly, then louder. "Nathaniel, please let me in." "Go away, Clara." His voice was raw, broken. "You mustn't be near me. Not now. Open this door immediately, or I shall create such a commotion that every servant in the household comes running." The threat worked. The lock turned, and Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, disheveled, hollow-eyed, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. "You shouldn't be here," he said dully. "If the allegations are true." "They are not true." Clara pushed past him into the study, noting the scattered papers, the overturned brandy glass, the signs of a man in torment. "My father was many things, stubborn, principled, sometimes foolishly honest, but he was not an adulterer." "You can't know that with certainty." "Yes, I can." Clara turned to face him, drawing on every ounce of her inner strength. "Because I know when you were born. March 15th, 1793. My father was in Scotland that entire winter and spring, working for my uncle's shipping concern. He didn't return until May, and the letters he sent my mother are dated and postmarked." Hope flickered in Nathaniel's grey eyes. "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain. The timeline is impossible." Clara stepped closer, longing to comfort him, but not daring to touch. "This is Barlow's work, lies crafted to destroy you because he fears your influence with the reform movements." "But the documents?" "Forgeries. Clever ones, perhaps, but forgeries nonetheless." Clara's voice rang with conviction. "We must prove it before these lies spread further." Nathaniel studied her face, and gradually some of his anguish faded. "You truly believe in my legitimacy?" "I believe in you," Clara said simply. "Title or no title, legitimate or bastard, you are the most honorable man I've ever known." The admission hung between them, too honest and too revealing. Clara saw the moment when gratitude transformed into something deeper, when the crisis stripped away their careful pretenses to expose the truth neither had dared acknowledge. "Clara," he whispered, and suddenly she was in his arms. The kiss was desperate, fierce with relief and terror, and months of suppressed longing. Clara melted against him, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was madness. They both knew it, but in the face of potential loss, restraint became impossible. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, reality crashed back with brutal force. "We cannot," Nathaniel said raggedly. "Even if the allegations are false, society would never accept." "I know." Clara stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know what I am, what you are. The gulf between us hasn't changed." "It's not about worth," he said urgently. "Never think that. But the world we live in demands conformity above happiness." "Yes, I understand." Clara straightened her spine, calling on the same pride that had sustained her through poverty and loss. "First, we clear your name. Then we adjust to whatever follows." But even as she spoke the rational words, Clara's heart was breaking, because she knew, with crystalline clarity, that clearing Nathaniel's name would restore his duty to marry within his class. Their stolen moment of connection would become a memory to treasure and regret in equal measure. The battle for truth would save his honor and destroy her heart. But she would fight it anyway, because love, even hopeless love, demanded nothing less than everything. Clara attacked the problem with the methodical precision of a general planning a campaign. If Barlow's allegations were indeed fabricated, there would be evidence of the deception, inconsistencies in the documents, witnesses to contradict the timeline, proof of her father's whereabouts during the crucial period. She began with Lady Margaret, whose sharp mind and extensive correspondence proved invaluable. Together, they compiled a detailed chronology of events from 1792 and 1793. Cross-referencing family records, church registers, and shipping manifests. Your father's employment with MacLeod Shipping is well documented, Lady Margaret observed, spreading papers across her writing desk. He was in Glasgow from December through April, supervising cargo transfers. The harbour master's logs show his signature on dozens of receipts. Meanwhile, Nathaniel had emerged from his despair with renewed determination. His legitimacy wasn't merely a personal matter. His tenants, servants, and dependents all relied on his protection. If Barlow succeeded in his scheme, hundreds of families would suffer. "I've requested audience with the Archbishop," he informed Clara during one of their clandestine meetings in the library. "Church records from my parents' marriage should establish the timeline definitively." Their collaboration was bittersweet torture. Working side by side, their minds in perfect harmony, Clara felt the cruel irony of finding her intellectual equal in a man she could never have. Every shared glance, every moment their hands brushed over documents, reminded her of what social convention made impossible. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Ellie, whose quick ears and unobtrusive presence made her privy to servants' gossip, overheard a conversation between two of Barlow's men at the village inn. The girl heard them discussing payment schedules, Clara reported to Nathaniel and Lady Margaret. Apparently, the forger who created the documents demanded additional compensation for extra authenticity details. A forger who might be willing to testify if properly motivated, Nathaniel said grimly. The investigation led them to London, where a disgraced clerk named Pemberton admitted to fabricating the letters under Barlow's commission. Faced with evidence of his crimes and the prospect of transportation, Pemberton provided detailed testimony about the forgery process. But their triumph was overshadowed by a devastating revelation hidden in Barlow's true motives. The magistrate's financial records, seized during a raid on his offices, revealed massive debts and embezzled funds. His attack on Nathaniel wasn't merely spite, it was desperation. By destroying the Marquess's reputation, Barlow hoped to claim Ashbourne lands through legal machinations. He would have turned every tenant family onto the roads, Clara said, studying the evidence with horror. Hundreds of people cast out to serve his greed. Not anymore, Nathaniel replied with quiet satisfaction. The Crown will seize his assets to compensate his victims. Your family's land will be restored, Clara, with full compensation for damages. The vindication should have brought joy, but Clara felt only hollow ache. With Nathaniel's name cleared and his position secure, their brief alliance would end. He would resume his place in society, eventually marry a woman of appropriate breeding, and she would return to, her father's reclaimed farm, a position as governess in some other household. The formal exoneration took place at Ashbourne Manor, with church officials, local magistrates, and peer witnesses present to hear Pemberton's testimony and examine the evidence. Sir Reginald Barlow, arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement, was notably absent. The allegations against Lord Ashbourne are hereby declared false and malicious, announced the senior magistrate. His legitimacy and right to title are confirmed beyond question. Polite applause filled the great hall. Nathaniel accepted congratulations with appropriate dignity, but Clara noticed his eyes searching the crowd until they found hers. The look that passed between them was laden with triumph, relief, and unbearable sadness. That evening, as guests departed and normal routine resumed, Clara found herself summoned to Nathaniel's study. She entered to find him standing before the window, hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid with decision. "The crisis has passed," he said without turning. "Your service to my family has been extraordinary." "I did only what justice demanded," Clara replied carefully. "You saved my honor, my title, my life's work." He turned to face her, his grey eyes intense. "There is no debt I could not repay." "You owe me nothing, my lord." "Nathaniel," he corrected automatically, then caught himself. The use of his given name had become natural between them, but now social barriers reasserted themselves like prison walls. "Your circumstances have changed," Clara continued, pushing through the pain in her chest. "With the allegations disproven and your position secure, you'll need to consider appropriate arrangements." "Yes," he said quietly, "I will." They stared at each other across the elegant room, both understanding what remained unspoken. His duty demanded marriage within his class. Her dignity required departure before she became an embarrassment to them both. "I would like to request references for seeking new employment," Clara said, with careful formality. "Lady Margaret has been kind, but now that the family no longer requires protection from scandal." "Clara," her name was a plea. "Must we pretend that what exists between us is merely professional regard?" The question broke her careful composure. "What exists between us is impossible," she whispered. "You know that as well as I." "Do I?" Nathaniel moved toward her, hope and determination warring in his expression. "Society's rules are made by men, Clara. They can be challenged by men willing to face consequences. The consequences would destroy you. Losing you would destroy me far more completely." Before Clara could protest, he had crossed the room and taken her hands in his. "Marry me, Clara Whitcomb, not because duty demands it, but because love compels it." The proposal struck her like lightning, impossible, wonderful, terrifying. "You cannot mean this. Your peers, your responsibilities." "My peers include reformers and progressives who married for love rather than connection. My responsibility includes setting an example of principle over convention." His grip on her hands tightened. "I have wealth enough to weather social disapproval, influence enough to protect those who depend on me. What I lack is the woman whose intelligence challenges me, whose courage inspires me, whose love could redeem my every remaining day." Tears blurred Clara's vision. "Nathaniel, I know the risks," he continued urgently. "I know the costs, but I also know that a life without you would be no life worth living." The words she had never dared hope to hear hung in the air between them. Clara saw her reflection in his eyes, not a farmer's daughter or a charity case, but a woman worthy of love and partnership. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Nathaniel, yes." When he kissed her this time, it tasted of promise rather than desperation, of beginnings rather than endings. Outside the study windows, snow began to fall on the moors where they had first met, covering the landscape in pristine white, like the blank pages of an unwritten future. 2 years later, the autumn sunlight streaming through the tall windows of Ashbourne Manor's morning room held the golden warmth of contentment as Clara Hawthorne, Marquess of Ashbourne, reviewed the quarterly reports from their tenant farms. The ledgers showed marked improvements in crop yields, livestock health, and most importantly to her heart, family stability. The Jennings family reports their youngest has earned a place at grammar school, she informed Nathaniel, who sat across from her reviewing correspondence from Parliament, and the Cooper's farm expansion is exceeding projected returns. "Excellent," Nathaniel replied, looking up from a letter bearing the Chancellor's seal. "Education and prosperity twin pillars of lasting reform. Their marriage had indeed caused scandal. As predicted, several prominent families had cut social connections. Invitations to certain houses ceased arriving, and Clara's background provided endless fodder for gossip sheets. But Nathaniel's unwavering support and their demonstrated success in progressive estate management had gradually won respect from unexpected quarters. Lady Margaret, now approaching her 75th birthday, had proven their staunchest ally. Anyone with eyes, she had declared to a gathering of disapproving dowagers, can see that Nathaniel has never been happier or more effective. If bloodlines matter more than results, then aristocracy deserves its decline. The sound of laughter from the gardens drew Clara to the window. Below, Ellie, now 14, and transformed from frightened waif to confident young lady, was teaching their 8-month-old son Thomas to walk across the lawn. The baby, dark-haired like his father but with Clara's determined chin, tottered between his aunt's outstretched arms and the encouraging calls of the groundskeeper's children. "He'll be walking properly within the week," Nathaniel observed, joining Clara at the window. His arm encircled her waist with the easy intimacy of deep partnership. "And climbing trees within the month, if he inherits his father's adventurous spirit," Clara replied, leaning into his warmth. Their son represented more than personal joy. He embodied the hope that rigid social divisions might soften in future generations. Thomas would grow up understanding both privilege and responsibility, surrounded by children from tenant families, learning that worth came from character rather than birthright. A soft knock interrupted their domestic reverie. Mrs. Henderson entered carrying a silver tray laden with calling cards. "Visitors, my lady," the housekeeper announced with barely suppressed pride. "The Earl of Pemberton and his daughter Lady Catherine. They've driven from Derbyshire specifically to meet you." Clara and Nathaniel exchanged glances. Lord Pemberton was known for his progressive views and support of education reform. His visit suggested growing acceptance of their unconventional union within influential circles. "Please show them to the blue drawing room," Clara instructed. "We'll join them shortly." As Mrs. Henderson departed, Clara caught her reflection in the window glass. The elegant morning dress of deep burgundy silk, the pearls at her throat, the confidence in her bearing, all spoke of her transformation from desperate farmer's daughter to respected marchioness. But more profound changes existed beneath the surface. The security of knowing her love was returned, the satisfaction of using privilege for justice, the joy of partnership with a man who valued her mind as much as her heart. "Are you ready for another diplomatic encounter?" Nathaniel asked, straightening his cravat. "With you beside me, I'm ready for anything," Clara replied, meaning every word. Their entrance to the drawing room created a small stir. Lord Pemberton, a distinguished man of middle years, rose with obvious pleasure. His daughter, perhaps 22 and possessed of striking auburn hair, studied Clara with curious intelligence rather than disapproval. "Lord and Lady Ashbourne," Pemberton said warmly, "thank you for receiving us. Your reputation for innovative estate management has reached even our remote corner of Yorkshire." "We're honored by your visit," Nathaniel replied smoothly. "Please be seated. How may we assist you?" "Actually," Lady Catherine interjected with a directness that reminded Clara of herself, "we've come seeking advice. Father wishes to implement tenant education programs similar to yours, but the local clergy objects to elevating peasants beyond their station." Clara smiled, recognizing the challenge they had faced and overcome. "Opposition often masks fear of change," she said. "We found that demonstrating benefits rather than arguing principles proved more persuasive." For the next hour they shared practical strategies. how to introduce literacy programs gradually, which local leaders to cultivate as allies, methods for measuring progress that convinced skeptics. Clara found herself speaking with natural authority, drawing on 2 years' experience transforming theoretical idealism into working reality. "Remarkable," Lord Pemberton declared, as their visit concluded. "You've achieved more substantive reform in 2 years than most manage in decades. Society could learn much from your example." After their guests departed, Clara and Nathaniel walked hand in hand through the formal gardens toward the moors, where their story had begun. The landscape had changed with the seasons and their improvements. New drainage systems prevented flooding, planned woodlands provided windbreaks, and stone walls marked boundaries of fairly distributed plots. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked as they paused at the hill's crest, looking back toward the manor. "The scandal, the social costs." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, considering. "I regret the pain our choice caused. Lady Margaret, initially, I regret that some good people felt compelled to distance themselves from us. But regret our marriage, never." He turned to face her fully, his grey eyes warm with conviction. "You've made me a better man, Clara, a better lord, a better human being. Whatever we've sacrificed in social acceptance, we've gained tenfold in purpose and joy." A cool breeze swept across the moors, carrying the scent of approaching winter, but also the promise of spring's eventual return. Clara thought of that storm-lashed night when they'd first met, both trapped by circumstances beyond their control. Now they stood as partners, having transformed not only their own lives, but the lives of hundreds who depended on their stewardship. "The future will judge us more kindly than the present," she said with quiet confidence. "Love based on mutual respect, marriage founded on partnership rather than transaction, leadership that serves rather than exploits. These are not revolutionary concepts, merely forgotten ones." "Then we're not rebels," Nathaniel said with a smile, "but archaeologists excavating virtues buried beneath centuries of convention." Their laughter echoed across the moors as they began the walk home, while behind them the sun set over Ashbourne Manor in a blaze of gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh opportunities to prove that love and justice could triumph over prejudice and tradition. But tonight, they would sit before their fire, Clara reading while Nathaniel worked on correspondence, baby Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Ellie practicing piano in the music room. A family bound not by obligation but by choice, not by social expectation but by genuine affection. The storm that had brought them together had passed, leaving in its wake a love story that would echo through generations. Proof that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with two hearts refusing to accept that happiness must bow to convention. As they reached the manor's entrance, Clara paused to look back once more at the moors stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, other young women faced impossible choices. Other good men struggled against unjust systems. Perhaps their example would light the way for future lovers. Bold enough to choose heart over duty, partnership over property, love over law. The thought warmed her as they stepped together across the threshold into the golden lamplight of home.